Greetings and salutations, and welcome to Vesperisms, the art of thinking for yourself. I'm your host, author, illustrator, Vesper Stamper, and every week I'm inviting you to plop down in that big, comfy red velvet chair here in my studio and have a 15-minute chat about recovering your vision and your worldview and your birthright as a creative thinker. Listen, there are a ton of amazing podcasts on creativity out there, and I have my favorites, but this podcast is a little different. Let's face it, oftentimes when you're looking for real help on making sense of yourself as an artist in this crazy world, it seems like you've got to choose from super political voices on one hand and one-line Instagram quotables and airy-fairy platitudes on the other. And that's just not going to cut it. Artists are meant to swim in the deep end. But often it feels as if everything needs to fit into that neat square on your Instagram feed, and there's not a lot of opportunity to get to the next level. And when you're in your studio day in and day out, it's easy to feel isolated and alone. But you're not alone. There are millions of us artists trying to figure out how to live and think as whole people. Because being an artist doesn't mean that you only talk about art or your skill or career. Being an artist is a whole person calling. You see everything through the lens of being an artist. So every week we're going to take 15 minutes and talk about how being an artist intersects with these multiple areas in our lives. I'm talking about everything ranging from politics to parenting, finances to fashion, by which I mean, is it okay to work in your pajamas or not? Whether to live in the city or the country, the place of spirituality in your work, recommended reading, materials and methods, and anything else that you want to talk about. So why did I decide to jump into this podcast pool? Well, I'll tell you a little story. I've been an illustrator for well over 20 years now. I grew up in New York City. I went to a famous arts high school. I went to 2 famous art colleges, and I thought I would emerge into instant success because I was talented and my dreams were big and my confidence was high. And yet, real life was constantly throwing me curveballs. And somewhere around 15 years in, just when things were looking their brightest, I had a car accident. And every artist's worst nightmare happened. My working arm was permanently damaged. I had to reinvent everything. How I held a pencil, how I held a fork, how I made marks on the page, the kinds of paint I could and couldn't use. It took me a year and a half of rehab to be able to work again. And I had a music career on the side that I had been pursuing since I was 15 years old, and that came to an abrupt end. So I made this totally logical choice. I applied to grad school. Not just that, but a really intensive program, my dream program. It was a total long shot. And after all that trauma and loss to my body and dreams, the reason I did it was I had to reclaim myself as an artist. I had to learn again for myself who I was and what art making meant to me. And I did. I discovered a passion and talent in grad school for writing, of all things, and unexpectedly became a novelist of young adult historical fiction. But while I definitely found a new and stronger voice as an artist in grad school, I found that despite having been immersed in art community in a really, sophisticated place like New York City since I was 13 years old, the environment within my new school cohort was a strange, disorienting place that I barely recognized as an art space sometimes. Social media had come barreling in the meantime, and it was playing up our human tendency toward tribalism, demanding that we line up in these neat ideological rows. And some of my peers were calling for types of censorship and curtailments on the First Amendment and political orthodoxy and everything as a kind of classic 90s New York City liberal and artist had been taught to reject. So I've spent the last few years trying to wrap my head around this new landscape and adapt to it. As an artist first, I've tried to listen carefully and understand where we're at and recover my voice, my right to speak and think and be a misfit and live outside and between many different spheres, because there's something else that exists in that space between, and that's a bridge. So if you've felt the same way, that the ground has kind of shifted under your feet and you want to use your identity as an artist to help culture to heal and be a place where truth and love can mingle and flow together beneath those bridges that you're building, but you're not quite sure how, then come along with me as we look at the scattered pieces and figure out what we're dealing with and rebuild an artistic view of the world. You can subscribe to Vesperisms here or wherever you listen to podcasts and follow me on Instagram at Vesper Illustration. If you go to anchor.fm/Vesperisms, you can leave me a voice message and let me know what you'd like me to talk about or who you'd like me to talk to on this podcast. You can also subscribe to my newsletter at vesperillustration.com to be notified when the podcast officially launches on April 1st and other news about my work. And I won't even mind if you leave me a 5-star review ahead of time, just based on this little teaser. My friend, I am in this with you. I'm using this podcast as a way to kind of figure it out as I go along, because we artists and creatives have power to see beneath the surface and take the long view and to see to the inner condition. We've got to reclaim that. I'm on this journey with you, and I'm looking for fellow travelers. Your voice is important, and your contribution matters. And I just want you to remember this one thing. Work isn't everything, but everything is the work. See you next time.